Her husband laughed brazenly into the phone. "You'll come crawling back yourself, and you'll even beg for forgiveness." And her mother kept nagging her every day. "Go back to your husband. Who's going to need you with 2 kids?" But the woman clenched her teeth and did something no one expected her to do. A February evening hung over the city like a damp bedsheet soaked in cold and hopelessness. Esperanza Castillo stood by the window of her rented one-room apartment, pressing the phone to her ear, listening to that nauseatingly familiar voice of her husband. No, her ex-husband. Though officially they weren't divorced yet, 2 months ago Esperanza had done the unthinkable. She had left Joaquin, taking her children and a suitcase packed with only the essentials. "You'll come back on your own, and you'll even apologize." Joaquin's arrogant laugh grated on her nerves like a knife scraping glass. "What's this fantasy of yours? Independence? Who's going to want you, with 2 kids and no decent job?" Esperanza stayed silent, pressing her lips together so tightly they turned white. Behind her, on the only couch, which doubled as both the living room and the children's bedroom, 7-year-old Emilio and 5-year-old Sofia were fast asleep. The children she had taken that desperate leap for. The children she had to protect, from their father's yelling, from his drunken weekend outbursts, from the suffocating atmosphere that had filled their former home. "Joaquin, don't call me again," Esperanza said quietly, but there was steel in her voice. "Send the child support as we agreed." "Child support?" Joaquin burst out laughing. "And what if I decide not to pay? What will you do then, on your pathetic salesgirl salary? Eat pasta with ketchup?" Esperanza hung up before he could finish his tirade. Her hands trembled, her heart beat like a trapped bird, but she didn't cry. Her tears had run dry back in December, when she'd been packing her suitcase while Joaquin screamed at Emilio for breaking a cup. Something inside her had snapped then, like an old branch under weight. 33 years old. A third of her life gone, and she had spent it married to a man who thought she was his property. 10 years of patience, silence, and false hope that things would change, that Joaquin would become better, that their children would grow up in a loving family. But love had long since vanished. What remained was habit, dependence, and fear of the unknown. Esperanza walked to the window and looked out into the courtyard. February painted the world in shades of gray houses, a gray sky above crooked garages, and bare trees drowning in twilight. Even the rare streetlights seemed dim, as if saving their glow for someone more deserving. "Mom, why was Dad yelling on the phone?" Emilio's sleepy voice made her turn around. The boy sat on the couch, tousle-haired and drowsy, but his eyes were serious, too grown up for his age. Esperanza sat beside him and gently smoothed his hair. "Dad's upset that we live apart," she explained softly. "Go back to sleep, you have school tomorrow." "Mom, are we really not going home again?" he asked, not with sadness, but with hope. Hope that this nightmare was truly over. "No, we're not going back," Esperanza said firmly. "This is our home now." Emilio nodded and lay down again, wrapping an arm around his sister. Sofia didn't even wake, she just snuffled softly and hugged her worn-out stuffed bunny tighter. Esperanza went into the kitchen, where a single mug sat on the windowsill, the one that read "Best Mom," the gift Emilio had given her last Mother's Day. She switched on the kettle and took out a pack of cheap tea. Money was running out. Her salary as a sales assistant in a children's clothing store barely covered rent and the most basic expenses. Joaquin's child support payments came irregularly, and when they did arrive, they came with snide comments in the payment notes. The phone rang again. Esperanza looked at the screen. "Mom." Valentina called every day, and every time, it was the same conversation. "Esperanza, what are you doing to yourself?" Her mother's voice was full of reproach and despair. "All the neighbors already know you left your husband. What a disgrace. And the children? Have you even thought about the children?" "Mom, that's exactly who I'm thinking about," Esperanza answered wearily, sitting at the tiny kitchen table. "What do you know about thinking?" Valentina snapped. "Joaquin's a hardworking man, not a drunk, brings home a paycheck, and you? Who's going to want you with 2 kids? You think princes on white horses go searching for brides in rented apartments?" Esperanza listened to the familiar refrain and realized her mother truly wished her well. Valentina had lived alone ever since Esperanza's father left for another woman when her daughter was 12. Her mother feared loneliness for her daughter more than an unhappy marriage. "Go back to your husband before it's too late," she pleaded. "Apologize, tell him you were wrong. Men are like children, they sulk and then they forget. The main thing is not to be stubborn." "Mom, I can't," Esperanza said quietly. "I can't live watching his moods anymore. I can't listen to him shouting at the kids." I can't pretend everything's fine. And what's fine about what you're doing now? Her mother exclaimed. Dragging your kids from place to place, no money, no future. And what will people say? Esperanza couldn't take it anymore, she hung up. What will people say? Her mother's eternal fear, unknowingly passed down like a family curse. A lifetime of living to please others, bending under the weight of their expectations, forgetting your own dreams. The kettle boiled. Esperanza poured the tea. The hot mug warmed her hands. And suddenly she remembered how, as a girl, she had dreamed of becoming a designer. She used to draw houses she would one day build, rooms she would decorate her own way. She even had a vocational diploma in interior design. But then Joaquin came along, then the wedding, then the children, then the endless routine that left no room for dreams. She stood and walked to the mirror in the hallway. The cracked glass, left behind by the previous tenants, reflected the tired face of a 33-year-old woman. Light brown hair tied in a messy ponytail, gray eyes with dark circles, pale skin. When had she grown old? When had that girl disappeared, the one who believed she could change the world around her? The crack split her reflection in two, past and future. What was, and what could have been? Esperanza traced her finger along the cold glass, and it seemed to her that the crack deepened. Tomorrow, another day at the store. More forced smiles for customers, more advice on which dress would suit their daughters best. What irony, the woman who once dreamed of creating beauty now sold children's clothes for pennies. But what else could she do? 10 years of her life had been spent being a good wife and mother, cooking, cleaning, washing, listening to Joaquin's complaints in silence. Never arguing. Never having an opinion of her own. Esperanza returned to the room and sat on the edge of the couch. The children were asleep, and in their peaceful faces she found her greatest motivation. Emilio and Sofia had to grow up in a world where you didn't have to be afraid to speak, where you could dream and pursue your goals. A world where no one would yell at them for a broken cup or a bad grade. But how was she going to make that world possible? Her salary barely covered rent and food. Joaquin's payments were erratic and humiliating. Career prospects, non-existent. Her education in the field was long outdated, and she had no work experience. Esperanza stood up and began tidying the scattered children's things, Emilio's textbooks, Sofia's coloring books, socks that somehow always ended up in the most unexpected places. The familiar routine calmed her, gave her time to think. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe she should go back to Joaquin, ask for forgiveness, pretend to be the obedient wife again. For the sake of the children, for stability, for the relief of not trembling every first of the month when the rent was due. But the very thought of it made her insides twist with disgust. She couldn't anymore. She couldn't pretend to love a man who saw her as an object. She couldn't stand by while Joaquin taught Emilio that the man is the head of the house and a woman must stay quiet and obey. She couldn't show Sofia the example of a wife who endures humiliation in exchange for a false sense of security. Esperanza went to the window and looked out into the courtyard again. February was drawing to an end, and somewhere beyond those clouds, spring was already waiting to be born. The phone rang again. Joaquin. Esperanza didn't even bother to pick up. Let him shout into the void. She would no longer listen to his threats and reproaches. She clenched her jaw and made herself a promise. No matter what happened, she would not go back. Not for herself, for the children. So that they could grow up as free people, not frightened victims of someone else's ambitions. In the morning, she would have to take Emilio to school, Sofia to kindergarten, and then go to work herself, smiling at customers, selling children's clothes. The routine was her only anchor in the fragile, uncertain world of her new life. But before going to bed, Esperanza decided to go through the old things she had brought from home. Maybe there was something she could sell to ease their financial strain. She pulled a worn travel bag out of the closet and began sorting through its contents. Old photographs, with smiles that were still genuine, documents, some notes. And then, among the yellowed papers, her fingers touched something familiar, her vocational diploma in interior design. She had earned it 15 years ago, full of hopes and plans. Back then, it had felt like the whole world was at her feet, that she would surely become a well-known designer, creating something beautiful and meaningful. Esperanza unfolded the diploma and stared for a long time at the faded letters of her name, Esperanza Gonzalez. Her maiden name, not Castillo yet. Once upon a time, she'd had dreams, plans, and faith in herself. Where had it all gone? Just then, the phone rang again. An unknown number. Esperanza hesitated. Should she answer? Something inside urged her to pick up. Hello, is this Esperanza? A woman's voice, confident and kind. My name is Elena Vargas. I was given your number and told that you have a background in design. Esperanza froze. Who could have given out her number? And why? I own a small design studio, the stranger continued. I'm looking for an assistant. If you are interested, could we meet tomorrow to discuss possible cooperation? Esperanza's heart began to race. It felt like a dream, a fantasy born of exhaustion. But the voice on the line sounded very real. I don't have any work experience, she admitted honestly. That's all right. What matters is passion and intuition. And from what I've heard, you have both. So, what do you say? Esperanza looked at the diploma in her hands, then at her sleeping children, then at the cracked mirror in the hallway. The nightlight's glow reflected in the crack, making it seem as if the mirror was shining from within. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I'd like to meet. Friday morning greeted Esperanza with a gray light seeping through thin curtains. She woke before the alarm, as she almost always did now. Sleep had become shallow, uneasy, filled with fragments of dreams where Joaquin shouted, the children cried, and she ran down an endless corridor, unable to find the exit. But this night, she had dreamed something different. She stood in a bright room full of beautiful things, and someone told her, you created all this with your own hands. Yesterday's call from Elena Vargas now seemed like a fantasy, a trick of her tired imagination. But the number in her phone was real, and the meeting was set for 10 in the morning. Esperanza checked the clock, 6:30. Time to get the kids ready and make it to the meeting that could change everything. Or, perhaps, change nothing, if it turned out to be just another disappointment. Mom, why are you up so early? Emilio rubbed his eyes and sat up on the couch, rumpled and cranky from being woken too soon. Mom has an important meeting today, Esperanza said, pouring water into the kettle. Maybe they'll offer me a new job. Is the old job bad? The boy asked, a note of worry in his voice. In his 7-year-old world, any change felt like danger. Not bad, Esperanza explained gently. But this one could be better. Remember how I told you I used to dream of designing beautiful houses? Emilio nodded, came up to her, and hugged her legs. He was a serious boy, far too serious for his age, and Esperanza knew it was partly her fault. Children who grow up under constant tension mature too early. They learn to read adult moods, to adapt to them. Mom's going to draw houses? Sophia woke up, crawling out from under the blanket with messy braids and a sleepy face. Maybe, sweetheart. But first, I have to meet a lady and talk to her. Their morning routine went on as usual, oatmeal with jam for breakfast, searching for Sophia's missing tights, which always disappeared at the worst possible moment, checking Emilio's homework. The typical morning chaos, but today it felt different, infused with a quiet mixture of hope and fear. Esperanza's hands trembled slightly as she zipped up Sophia's jacket. The kindergarten greeted them with the familiar smell of porridge and children's voices. Olga, the teacher, a kind-eyed woman nearing retirement, with a tired smile, as always asked how they were doing. We're fine, Esperanza replied, not wanting to go into detail. Everyone at the kindergarten knew she had left her husband, and some of the staff looked at her with thinly veiled disapproval, especially the principal, who believed that broken families were a sign of moral decay. Sophia did some lovely drawings yesterday, Olga said, walking the girl into her group. She has a real talent for art. Maybe you should enroll her in an art class? An art class, another expense Esperanza couldn't afford. But she nodded and promised to think about it, knowing it was only a polite answer. There was no money for art lessons, just as there wasn't money for many other things that could make her children's lives brighter and richer. The school, where she dropped off Emilio next, greeted her with the usual noise of voices and the smell of chalk. Emilio was doing well, but his teacher, Nina, a strict, principled woman, never missed a chance to hint that a broken family was bad for a child. Emilio has become more withdrawn, she said, meeting Esperanza at the classroom door. Maybe you should consider reconciling with your husband? A child needs a father. Esperanza clenched her teeth and stayed silent. Explaining to Nina that it was the father who had made her son withdrawn was useless. To people like that teacher, family at any cost was more important than a child's peace of mind. The trip to the city center took almost an hour. Esperanza sat on the bus, pressed against the window, trying to steady her nerves. The address Elena Vargas had given her was in one of the new business centers, which in itself inspired respect. Real design studios, Esperanza had heard, were usually in places like that, not in basements or converted apartments. The business center dazzled her with glass and marble. A uniformed security guard politely asked where she was headed and pointed her to the elevator. Esperanza rode up to the 7th floor, found the right door with the plaque Harmony Interior Design Studio, and stood before it for a couple of minutes, mustering her courage. What was she doing here? She had no experience, no portfolio, not even proper clothes for such a meeting. The old suit she'd bought before Sophia was born now hung on her like a sack. But it was too late to turn back. Esperanza pressed the doorbell with resolve. A woman of about 45 opened the door, elegant, self-assured, dark hair pulled into a neat bun, impeccable makeup, a fine gray suit. Elena Vargas looked exactly as a successful businesswoman should. Esperanza? She smiled, extending her hand. Please, come in. The studio office was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking the city's central square. The walls were adorned with photos of living rooms, bedrooms, and kitchens, each project a true work of art. The furniture was tastefully chosen, live plants added coziness, and the fresh scent of coffee created an atmosphere of success and well-being. Have a seat, Elena offered, indicating a comfortable chair. Coffee? Thank you, Esperanza nodded, trying not to show how impressed she was. Elena poured coffee from an expensive machine into delicate cups and sat opposite her. Her every movement carried the confidence of someone used to making decisions. Tell me about yourself, she said, studying Esperanza closely. When did you get your training? Where have you worked? Esperanza felt herself blush with embarrassment. Against such polished surroundings, her biography seemed pitiful. She admitted frankly, she'd received her diploma 15 years ago but hadn't worked in the field. She got married, had children, worked as a sales clerk. And now? There was no judgment in Elena's voice, only professional interest. I'm in the middle of a divorce now, living with the kids on my own, looking for a way to earn a proper income, Esperanza added quietly. Elena nodded, took a sip of coffee, and considered her for a moment. Then she stood and walked over to one of the photos on the wall. Do you see this living room? She asked. What would you change in it? Esperanza stepped closer. The photo showed a spacious living room in a classic style, heavy furniture, gilded frames, brocade, and velvet. Beautiful, expensive, but something about it jarred the eye. Too much gold, she said cautiously. And the colors don't harmonize. The blue sofa clashes with the yellow curtains. And the floor lamp? It looks like it came from a completely different interior. Exactly. Elena smiled. It's a project by a former employee of mine. Technically competent, but it has no soul. What would you suggest? Esperanza thought for a moment. In her mind, a puzzle seemed to come together, images of a new interior blending into one another. I'd remove half the gilding, she began slowly. Leave it only on the picture frames. I'd make the sofa cream or beige. For the curtains, better natural linen, ivory. And I'd replace the floor lamp with something more contemporary, but still classic in spirit. Lighting? I'd add spotlights for the artwork. And definitely, fresh flowers. Lots of fresh flowers. Elena listened attentively, nodding and jotting notes in a notebook. You have good instinct, she said at last. Are you willing to learn? You'll need to master software, study new materials, and work with clients. I am, Esperanza answered without hesitation. Very much so. Good. Probation is 3 months, salary is twice what you make as a sales clerk. If you do well, we'll discuss a raise. Do you agree? Esperanza couldn't believe her ears. It seemed too good to be true. Who gave you my number? She asked. Tamara, your neighbor. She helps us with HR part-time. She mentioned you're trained as a designer and going through a difficult time. Tamara. Esperanza remembered the neighbor from the floor above, whom she sometimes greeted on the landing. A single mother who'd raised 3 children, always friendly, though they'd never really talked. When can I start? Esperanza asked, trying not to show how much her hands were trembling. Monday. To begin with, you'll assist me on current projects, learn the software, meet suppliers. I'll gradually assign you your own clients. Esperanza left the office as if in a dream. She clutched Elena Vargas's business card in her hand and felt her life taking a sharp turn. This was the beginning of something new, unknown, but wildly enticing. On her way home, she stopped by Tamara's. Her neighbor lived 1 floor up, in the same communal apartment, though her room was furnished with taste, simple but cozy furniture, lots of books, live plants on the windowsill. Thank you, Esperanza said when Tamara opened the door. Thank you for Elena. Come in, let's have tea, Tamara smiled. A woman of about 50, with kind eyes and graying hair. How did the meeting go? Over tea, Tamara told her own story. Her husband left when the youngest son was 2. She was left with 3 children, no money, and no profession. She worked as a cleaner, then a courier, then trained as an accountant. The first years were a nightmare, she admitted honestly. There wasn't enough money for anything, the children wore hand-me-downs, and they ate pasta with sausages every day. But then it got easier. The kids grew up, found their footing. My eldest has already given me grandchildren. Do you regret not going back to your husband? Esperanza asked. Not once, Tamara answered firmly. Better hard but honest than easy with constant humiliation. Children need to see that their mother is strong, that she can handle any hardship. It will help them in life. That evening, after the children fell asleep, Esperanza called her mother to tell her about the new job. Valentina listened in silence, then sighed heavily. Esperanza, why are you making things up? She said wearily. What kind of designer are you? You haven't done anything in your field for 15 years. And that woman is probably just looking for cheap labor. Mom, this is a chance, Esperanza tried to explain. Maybe the only one. A chance for what? To ruin things with Joaquin once and for all? He's furious that you're planning to work. He called me today, yelled that he'll take the kids through the courts. Esperanza's heart clenched. Joaquin really could file suit. He had a stable job, a good salary, his own apartment, and what did she have? A rented place, irregular income, and now a job change on top of it. Mom, I can't go back, she said quietly. Do you understand? I physically can't. Then at least give him the children. Let them grow up with their father in normal conditions. You can sort yourself out however you like. Esperanza hung up, unable to bear it. Handing the children over to Joaquin, it would be like cutting off her own hands. The children were the only meaning in her life, the only reason she found the strength to fight every day. She walked to the window and looked out into the courtyard. February was ending, and spring was already in the air. On the windowsill of the neighboring house, someone had placed a box of seedlings, tender green sprouts stretching toward the light despite the cold. Tomorrow was Saturday. Joaquin would most likely try to see the children. Esperanza knew she couldn't forbid him from meeting with Emilio and Sofia, but every such meeting turned into a trial. Joaquin used the children as leverage, telling them their mother was to blame for their poverty, that it was her fault they lived this way. The phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Esperanza hesitated, but answered anyway. Esperanza? Joaquin's voice was drunk and venomous. So, are you happy now? Your mother told me all about your new little job. You think I'll let my kids live in poverty while you play at being a designer? Joaquin, you're drunk. Don't call again, Esperanza tried to end the conversation. Don't tell me what to do, he shouted. Tomorrow I'm filing a lawsuit. I'll take the kids, and you'll learn what happens to women who destroy families. Esperanza hung up and stood by the window for a long time, staring into the dark courtyard. Joaquin wasn't bluffing. He really could try to take the children through the courts. And what could she oppose him with? A rented apartment, a new job where she hadn't yet proven herself. But she couldn't give up. She clenched her jaw and made herself a promise. No matter what happened, she would fight. For her children. For her new life. For the right to be happy. Monday began with Esperanza waking at 5 a.m. to the sound of her own heartbeat. The first day at her new job. The first day of the life she had dreamed of 15 years ago, when she received her diploma and believed the whole world lay at her feet. Now, at 33, with 2 children and the weight of a failed marriage behind her, she'd been given a second chance. And the thought of it both thrilled and terrified her. The children were still asleep on the couch, curled together in a warm tangle of small bodies and blankets. Sofia snuggled against her brother's shoulder, softly breathing, and even in sleep Emilio looked serious and focused. Esperanza kissed them each on the forehead, careful not to wake them, and went into the kitchen to make breakfast. March peeked through the windows with timid rays of sunlight breaking through the bare branches. The air smelled of spring and change, and Esperanza realized that for the first time in many months she was waking not with heaviness in her heart, but with anticipation. Today she wouldn't have to stand behind the counter at the store, smiling at customers and selling children's clothes. Today she would become what she had always dreamed of being. Mom, why are you all dressed up? Emilio asked, appearing in the kitchen in his pajamas, his hair sticking out in all directions. Esperanza looked at her reflection in the kettle. She had really tried to look better than usual, put on her best dress, fixed her hair neatly, even applied a little makeup. Her wardrobe was far from rich, but she had done her best with what she had. Mom has her first day at the new job today, she explained, pouring him some milk. I want to make a good impression. Was your old job worse? Emilio always asked too many questions, and Esperanza understood why. It was his way of showing anxiety. Too many changes had shaken their little family, and the boy feared more upheaval. Not worse, just different. Better, Esperanza said patiently. I'll be doing something I actually like. And they pay more, so maybe we'll be able to rent a nicer place. Emilio nodded, but the worry in his eyes didn't fade. Too many promises in his short life had already been broken, and he had learned not to believe easily in a better future. Sophia woke up in a good mood, as she usually did. The 5-year-old still had that rare childlike gift, the ability to rejoice in every new day, no matter what. She twirled in front of the hallway mirror, admiring her new patterned tights that Esperanza had bought with her last bit of money. "Mom, when I grow up, will I work in a pretty office too?" Sophia asked as Esperanza braided her hair. "You will, sweetheart," Esperanza smiled. "You'll work wherever you want and do what makes you happy." It was more than a promise. It was a vow. Esperanza swore to herself that her children would not repeat her mistakes, that they would not live by someone else's idea of happiness, nor settle for a life that didn't bring them joy. The ride to the office felt endless. Esperanza sat on the bus, mentally rehearsing her first day, what she'd say to Elena, whether she'd manage the design software, whether she'd look foolish or inexperienced. Her heart pounded so loudly it seemed everyone around could hear it. Elena greeted her with a cup of coffee and a warm smile. The studio was bright and cozy, soft classical music playing in the background. The atmosphere of the place had a calming effect. It smelled of creativity and success, and for the first time in a long while, Esperanza felt she was exactly where she belonged. "Let's start with something simple," Elena said, seating her at a computer. "We'll go over the design software. Don't worry if it feels complicated at first, everyone goes through that." The program turned out to be difficult, but fascinating. Esperanza was surprised to find she had an intuitive sense for space and color. The things others might take months to learn came naturally to her. Her hand seemed to remember what she'd been taught 15 years ago. Gradually, the first clumsy but recognizable interiors began to appear on the screen. "You really do have talent," Elena said approvingly, studying her work. "A sense of proportion, an understanding of light. You can't teach that, either you have it, or you don't." The praise warmed her more than any paycheck. Esperanza couldn't even remember the last time someone had told her she was good at something. Joaquin had always found flaws in everything she did. Her mother constantly compared her to more successful women, and at her old job she'd been just another worker, expected only to smile and sell. By noon, a client arrived, Andres Silva, a man of about 38, dressed in an expensive yet modest suit, with tired eyes and a kind smile. He worked in IT, had recently divorced, and now wanted to furnish his new apartment. "You know," he said, speaking to Elena but glancing at Esperanza, "I spent 10 years living in a place decorated by my ex-wife, all gold and frills and curls like a wax museum. I just want something simple, cozy, somewhere I can relax after work." "Esperanza will work on your project," Elena said unexpectedly. "She specializes in creating warm, comfortable interiors." Esperanza almost choked on her coffee. Specializes? She'd only opened the design software that very morning. But Elena gave her an encouraging look, and she gathered her composure. "Tell me about your preferences," Esperanza said, trying to sound confident. "What colors do you like? What style? Modern, classic?" "To be honest, I don't really know," Andres admitted. "I just wanted to feel comfortable and peaceful. And, if my kids visit, for them to have a place to play." "You have children?" Esperanza asked, her voice softening with genuine interest. "Two. A boy and a girl. They live with their mother, but they visit me on weekends sometimes. I want them to feel at home here." There was so much quiet sadness and love in his words that Esperanza felt a wave of sympathy. She knew too well what it was like, being a divorced parent, fighting for the right to see your children, trying to build a little corner of happiness amid brokenness. "I understand," she said softly. "I have 2 children too. We recently moved as well." Andres looked at her intently, and in his gaze there was understanding. People who have been through divorce recognize each other without words. The same pain, and the same hope for a new beginning, lives in their eyes. The rest of the day passed in a blur of studying software and sketching out ideas for Andres' project. Elena proved to be a patient mentor, explaining the hard parts without irritation, even when Esperanza asked the same question several times. By evening, her head was buzzing with information, but her soul felt strangely light. At home, her children were waiting, bursting with questions about her new job. Emilio listened seriously to her stories about design programs and project layouts, while Sophia demanded to see how her mom drew houses on the computer. Are there other kids there too? Sophia asked, settling herself on her mother's lap. No, sweetheart, only grown-ups work there. But there's one man who has a little boy and a girl, just like you and Emilio. Is he nice? Sophia continued her questioning. I think so, Esperanza smiled. He loves his children very much. That evening, her mother called. Valentina was true to form, full of worries and warnings. So, how's that new job of yours? She asked in the tone of someone expecting bad news. They haven't tricked you, have they? No, Mom, everything's fine. It's interesting work, and the people are nice. And are they actually paying you? They're not making you do anything weird, are they? You know how many scammers there are these days. Mom, it's a serious company with a good reputation. And the pay really is better than at the store. So what if it's better? Valentina sighed. Joaquin called. Said he's filing a lawsuit for the kids. Says he won't let them live in poverty while you're playing at being a designer. Esperanza's heart tightened. She knew Joaquin wasn't bluffing. He really could try to take the children, and he had all the formal grounds for it. A steady job, his own apartment, a stable income. Mom, I'm not playing. I'm working. Honestly working. What kind of work is that? Her mother burst out. Drawing pictures? That's not serious. Normal people study to become doctors, teachers, and you're doing this nonsense. Mom, interior design is a real profession. People pay good money for beautiful homes. Nonsense, Valentina cut her off. Go back to Joaquin before it's too late. Ask his forgiveness, tell him you understand your mistake. He's a good man, he'll forgive you. Esperanza closed her eyes and counted to 10. There was no point in trying to explain that Joaquin was anything but good. Valentina belonged to a generation of women who believed that any husband was better than being alone, and were willing to endure anything for the sake of being called a married woman. Mom, I'm not going back. And I won't give up the children. Esperanza could barely hold back her tears. And what if he really takes you to court? What will you do then? He's got a flat, a steady job, and you? A rented hole and a job that no one understands. After the call, Esperanza's good mood completely vanished. She tucked the children into bed and stood for a long time at the window, looking out into the March night. Joaquin really could take her to court. And what could she oppose him with? A new job where she hadn't yet proven herself? A rented apartment? An uncertain future? But giving up was not an option. Not now, after she had finally tasted real life. Not after someone, for the first time in years, had told her she had talent. The next day, Andres came to the studio again. Esperanza showed him her first sketches, bright living room in a modern style, bedroom in calm tones, and a children's room that could easily transform from a play area into a sleeping space. This is exactly what I wanted, he said, studying the images on the screen. How did you know? I'm a parent too, Esperanza replied simply. I know what children need, and what adults need when they want to relax after work. Do your kids see their father often? Andres asked unexpectedly. Esperanza felt her cheeks flush. The question was too personal, but there was no idle curiosity in his voice, only empathy and understanding. We separated recently, she said carefully. Our relationship is complicated right now. I understand. It wasn't easy for me either. My ex-wife wouldn't let the kids stay over for a long time. Said I was a bad influence. Time heals, but very slowly. There was such sincere sadness in his words that Esperanza couldn't help but feel sympathy for him. This man, successful and well-off, was struggling with the same pain she knew too well. Divorce was always a disaster, especially when children were involved. After a week at work, Esperanza began to find her rhythm. The software came easier, her projects grew more interesting, and Elena trusted her with more independent tasks. For the first time in years, Esperanza woke up eager to go to work, and fell asleep at night thinking about new ideas. But home life was getting harder. Emilio started acting out, refusing to do homework, being irritable. Sophia, too, became more restless, often waking up at night and calling for her mother. You're always thinking about work. Emilio burst out one evening when Esperanza once again asked him to wait while she finished browsing a furniture catalog. You used to talk to us all the time, now you're always busy. His words hit harder than any reproach from Joaquin or her mother. Esperanza closed her laptop and sat beside him. I'm sorry, she said softly. You're right. I have been thinking a lot about work. But you see, it's very important for us. If I do well, we can live better. I don't want better, Emilio sniffled. I just want Mom. Esperanza hugged him tightly and felt tears prick her own eyes. The eternal dilemma of a working mother, how to balance career and family, how to give your children a decent life without depriving them of your presence. You know what? She said, kissing the top of his head. Tomorrow's Saturday. We're not going anywhere, not seeing anyone. We'll just spend the whole day together. Deal? Emilio nodded, a shy smile spreading over his face. Children always forgive easily if they know they're loved. But Saturday morning brought an unpleasant surprise. The doorbell rang early, and when Esperanza peered through the peephole, she saw Joaquin standing in the hallway. He was wearing a new suit, holding a bouquet of flowers, and wearing that smug smile she knew too well. Open up, he said, noticing her through the peephole. I've come to see the kids. I have a right. Esperanza unlocked the door but kept the chain on. Joaquin looked sober and even charming, but she knew him too well to trust that facade. The kids aren't home, she lied. Don't lie. I can hear them. He tried to push the door open, but the chain held. You have no right to stop me from seeing my own children. Yes, I do. Until visitation rights are set legally. Exactly, Joaquin said smugly, they're not set yet. But they will be by the court. Now move. He shoved the door harder, and the chain strained to its limit. Esperanza knew she couldn't hold it much longer, and the children, already awake, were listening fearfully from their room. Daddy! Sophia cried out joyfully, not understanding the tension. See? Joaquin said triumphantly. The kids want to see me. You're turning them against their father. At that moment, Tamara appeared on the landing, carrying a grocery bag. What's going on here? She asked sternly, taking in the scene. Just a family matter, Joaquin replied brazenly. None of your business. It is my business, Tamara said firmly. If someone's disturbing the peace in our building. Esperanza, are you all right? Thank you, Tamara, Esperanza nodded. I'll handle it. Joaquin shot Tamara a contemptuous look but backed away. He knew witnesses were the last thing he needed, especially if things went to court. Fine, he said, tossing the bouquet at her feet. But this isn't over. Soon everyone will see what kind of mother you really are, and the kids will learn the truth about who abandoned them. He left, and for a long time Esperanza couldn't pull herself together. The children were upset. They didn't understand why their father hadn't come in. Emilio blamed his mother for driving him away, and Sophia simply cried. That evening, Esperanza sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold tea and wondered if Joaquin might be right. Maybe she really was a bad mother. Maybe the children would be better off with their father, who could give them stability and comfort. But then she remembered how Emilio flinched at Joaquin shouting, how Sophia hid behind her when he came home tipsy. No. Whatever happened, she would not hand the children over to a man who treated them like his property. She couldn't stand by while Joaquin taught Emilio that the man is the head of the house and a woman must be silent and obedient. She couldn't show Sophia the example of a wife who endures humiliation in exchange for a false sense of safety. The phone rang again. Joaquin. Esperanza didn't even pick up. Let him shout into the void. She would no longer listen to his threats and reproaches. She clenched her teeth and made herself a promise. No matter what happened, she would not go back. Not for herself, for the children. So they would grow up free, not as frightened victims of someone else's ambitions. April rain drummed against the windows of the district courthouse, composing a somber melody for the most important day of Esperanza's life. She sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, clutching a folder of documents, trying to steady her shaking hands. In half an hour the hearing would begin to determine the children's place of residence. Joaquin hadn't been bluffing. He had really filed suit. Opposite her sat the plaintiff himself in an expensive suit, next to his lawyer, a middle-aged man with cold eyes and a smug smile. Joaquin looked confident, even triumphant, glancing at Esperanza from time to time as if she'd already lost. In his hands was a hefty packet of documents, income statements, a character reference from work, the deed to his apartment. Esperanza, what have you done? Her mother whispered, seated beside her on the bench. Valentina nervously twisted the handle of her purse and looked as if she were at her own funeral. You've dragged it all the way to court, what a disgrace. Mom, not now, Esperanza pleaded quietly. The last thing she needed at that moment was reproach and lamentation. Then when? When they take the children away? Valentina dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. I told you, go back to your husband and apologize. But you wouldn't listen. Esperanza closed her eyes and tried to focus. Elena had given her the day off, understanding how important this was. The children were with Tamara, who had taken time off to help. Andres had offered to help with a lawyer, but Esperanza refused. She didn't want to be indebted to anyone. The courtroom door opened and the clerk announced the start of the proceedings. Esperanza rose on trembling legs and went in. The judge, a woman of about 50, with a tired face and stern gaze, was leafing through the case file. Case of the plaintiff, Joaquin Castillo, versus the defendant, Esperanza Castillo, regarding determination of the residence of minor children, she announced. Plaintiff, state your claims. Joaquin's lawyer stood and began to recite the case in a monotone. He spoke of a responsible father who cared for his children's well-being and of an unstable mother who frequently changed jobs and residences, subjecting the children to stressful situations. My client has a stable income, his own housing, and can provide the children with quality education and medical care, the lawyer said, flourishing documents. The defendant, on the other hand, lives in a rented apartment and works for a dubious organization engaged in unclear activities. What do you have to say in your defense? The judge asked, turning to Esperanza. Esperanza stood, feeling her heart hammer. She hadn't been prepared for such wording, such aggression. Her thoughts tangled, the words refused to form coherent sentences. I am working as an interior designer, she began uncertainly. It's a serious profession. And the children have been living with me for several months. They're used to it. They're happy with me. Can you verify your income? The judge continued. Provide a statement of salary? I've only recently started at the new job. I haven't received the paperwork yet. So you have no stable income? Joaquin's lawyer pressed, scarcely concealing his triumph. I do. I just recently changed jobs. To a job of questionable nature, the lawyer persisted. Drawing pictures cannot be considered a serious means of earning. It's not drawing pictures. Esperanza burst out. It's creating design projects, creative work that's well paid. Your Honor, Joaquin interjected, rising, I'm not against my ex-wife pursuing her hobbies. But the children shouldn't suffer because of her career experiments. They need stability. The judge studied the documents, occasionally glancing at the parties. Her face betrayed nothing, and Esperanza couldn't tell where the court's sympathies lay. Will there be witnesses? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, Joaquin's lawyer replied. We call the defendant's mother, Valentina. Esperanza felt the ground drop away beneath her. Her mother? A witness for Joaquin. Valentina rose uncertainly and approached the stand. How would you assess your daughter's qualities as a mother? The lawyer asked. Esperanza, she's a good girl, her mother began, avoiding her daughter's eyes. But very stubborn, she doesn't listen to her elders. I begged her to go back to her husband, she refuses. I told her children should grow up in a two-parent family, but she's set in her ways. So you believe the children would be better off with their father? The lawyer pressed. Valentina hesitated, searching painfully for words. I believe a family should be preserved, she said at last. Joaquin is a good man, hard-working. And Esperanza, she's always been a dreamer, has her head in the clouds. Esperanza listened to her mother's words and felt her last hope crumble. Her own mother was testifying against her. The one person who should have supported her was betraying her at the hardest moment. Does the defendant have questions for the witness? The judge asked. Esperanza stood, looking at her mother through tear-filled eyes. Mom, she said softly, be honest, when you come to visit, do the children look happy or unhappy? Children are always glad to see their grandma, Valentina answered uncertainly. Did you see the bruises on Emilio after his father taught him to be a man? Do you remember how Sofia hid in the closet when Joaquin shouted? Esperanza, don't. Her mother cried, waving her hands. Answer the question, the judge said sternly. Joaquin was sometimes strict with the children, but he's a man. Men raise children differently. Strict or cruel? Esperanza persisted. Objection. Joaquin's lawyer jumped to his feet. The defendant is trying to smear my client with unsubstantiated accusations. Objection sustained, the judge nodded. Proceed to your next question. The hearing continued for 2 hours. Joaquin spoke about his plans for raising the children, presented income statements, even a purchase contract for new furniture for the kids' rooms. Esperanza tried to explain why the children should remain with her, but her arguments sounded weak against Joaquin's stack of documents and her mother's testimony. The court will retire to deliberate, the judge announced. The decision will be announced in 1 hour. That hour felt like an eternity to Esperanza. She sat in the corridor while her mother tried to justify herself. Esperanza, please understand, I only want what's best for you, Valentina spoke through tears. Children need a father. And you're still young, you'll remarry, have more children. Mom, you betrayed me, Esperanza said quietly. At the hardest moment of my life. The very hardest. I told the truth. Her mother protested. Joaquin is a good man. He just has a difficult character. But he'll provide for the children. And what about love? Safety? The children's right to live without fear? Love. Valentina waved a hand. You can't put love on the table. When the judge announced the decision, Esperanza was already braced for defeat. But the unexpected happened. The court takes into account the children's attachment to their mother and the stability of their psychological state over recent months, the judge read aloud. Given the children's ages and their wish to remain with their mother, the court determines that the minor's place of residence shall be the respondent's apartment. At first, Esperanza didn't grasp that she had one. Her ears were ringing, her knees buckled with relief. Joaquin sat pale, while his attorney furiously scribbled in a notebook. However, the judge continued, the court sets a probationary period of 6 months. If during this time the respondent's financial situation does not stabilize, the case may be reconsidered. Outside the courthouse, Esperanza drew a deep breath of April air. The rain had stopped, and the first sunbeams were breaking through the clouds. She had won, but it felt like a Pyrrhic victory. 6 months was not much time to prove herself as a mother. At home, the children and Tamara were waiting. Emilio and Sofia ran to their mother, unaware of the legal nuances, but sensing her tension. Mom, are we staying with you? Emilio asked, hugging her around the waist. Yes, sweetheart, we're staying. And Daddy won't take us away anymore, Sofia added. He won't, Esperanza said firmly, though she knew Joaquin wouldn't stop. He would appeal and look for new ways to put on pressure. That evening, Elena called. Esperanza told her about the hearing and the 6-month probation. I understand, Elena said after a pause. Then we need to move fast. I have a proposal. A major contract, designing an office for a construction company. Big project, good money. If you pull it off, you can rent a decent apartment and prove your financial stability to the court. And if I can't? Esperanza asked. Then you'll lose the job. The clients are serious people, they don't forgive mistakes. But there may not be another chance. Esperanza knew it was a risk. She'd worked only a month and had practically no experience. But she had no choice either. Either she proved to everyone that she was capable of more, or she would lose everything. I agree, she said. I'll take the project. The days that followed flew by in a frenzy. Esperanza studied the specifics of office design, met with suppliers, calculated budgets. She worked late into the night, after the children were asleep, and got up at 5 to get through everything she had planned. Andres often stopped by the studio, watching her work. His own project was almost finished, but he kept finding reasons to meet again. You've changed a lot over the last month, he said one day as they discussed details of his living room. You're more confident, stronger. Life forces you, Esperanza replied without looking up from the drawings. When there's no choice, you find strength you never knew you had. And how are the kids handling your work marathon? Esperanza set down her pencil and looked at him. There was genuine concern in his eyes, not idle curiosity. It's hard, she admitted. Emilio's upset that I don't spend enough time with them, Sofia's sleeping worse. But it's temporary. It's for their future. You know, Andres said after a pause, I have a good friend who's a child psychologist. She helped my kids through the divorce. Maybe you should take Emilio and Sofia to see her, just as a precaution. Thank you, Esperanza smiled. But we're managing for now. She didn't want to admit she couldn't afford it. Every penny went to rent, food, and the children's needs. Therapy was a luxury she couldn't manage. The construction company project moved forward with difficulty. The clients were demanding, constantly making changes, criticizing every detail. Esperanza redrew the plan several times, but each version was better than the last. You're getting there, Elena said approvingly as she reviewed the latest draft. It's clear you're putting your heart into this. What if they don't approve it again? Esperanza worried. They will. And if not, we'll find other clients. The main thing is not to give up. In mid-May, the thing Esperanza feared most happened. Sofia fell ill, high fever, stomach pain. The emergency doctor insisted on hospitalization. Suspected appendicitis, he said. She needs urgent surgery. Esperanza sat in the hospital corridor while they prepared Sofia for the operation and felt everything collapsing. The decisive project presentation for the construction company was scheduled for the next day. Months of work, her one chance to prove her professional worth. Her phone buzzed nonstop with calls from Elena and the clients. Esperanza explained the situation, begged to reschedule, but in return heard cold voices and dissatisfaction. We can't wait, the company representative said. Either the presentation is tomorrow or find other clients. Andres arrived at the hospital as soon as he heard. He brought a box of toys for Sophia and a cup of coffee for Esperanza. How is she? He asked, sitting beside her on the bench. The operation went well, Esperanza said, unable to hide her tears. But I lost the project. The presentation is tomorrow, and I can't leave my daughter. What if you present from here? Andres suggested. You've got a connection. From the hospital? Esperanza shook her head in amazement. That's not serious. What's serious is that you're not abandoning your child for your career. That speaks to your priorities better than any presentation, Andres said gently. He helped her set up a video conference right there in the hospital room. While Sophia slept after surgery, Esperanza presented her project to the clients, sitting at her daughter's bedside. Please excuse the setting, she began. My daughter is in the hospital, but I didn't want to let you down. Did they accept the project? Andres asked afterward. More than that, the clients were impressed by her devotion to her family and her professionalism. Mom, Sophia whispered, waking up. Were you drawing houses while I was asleep? Yes, sweetheart. Mommy was working so we can live in a beautiful home. Sophia smiled and drifted back to sleep, and Esperanza suddenly realized she had won the main battle of her life. Not just the project, but the right to be a real mother and a successful professional at the same time. Morning burst into the room in streams of sunlight, turning the white walls into golden canvases of hope. Sophia slept peacefully, her breathing was even, and her cheeks had grown rosy. The surgery had gone well, the fever was down, and the doctors promised discharge as soon as tomorrow. Esperanza sat in a chair beside her daughter, holding the laptop with the results of yesterday's presentation, and couldn't believe it. The project hadn't just been approved, the clients were thrilled. The construction company immediately offered her a 6-month staff position as a designer, with a salary of $3,000 a month. In a single night, everything had changed. But the most important thing was this: she had proved that a woman can be both a good mother and a successful professional. Mom, why are you crying? Sophia's sleepy voice made Esperanza look up. The girl was gazing at her with wide eyes, with no trace of yesterday's pain. Mom's crying from happiness, sweetheart, Esperanza smiled, wiping her tears. You're better, and things are going well at Mom's work. Can we buy a beautiful apartment now? Sophia tried to sit up in bed. We can. And not just an apartment, there's a lot we can do now. At that moment, Emilio burst into the room, with Tamara right behind him. The boy rushed to his sister and hugged her carefully, while Tamara watched the scene with a smile. How's our patient? She asked, kissing Sophia on the forehead. Almost all better, the girl said proudly. And Mom worked right here yesterday and drew a beautiful office for some men. I know, Tamara smiled. The whole hospital is talking about it. The nurses are telling everyone how you gave a presentation without leaving your daughter's side. They say it was very touching. Esperanza felt embarrassed. She hadn't thought about how it looked from the outside. She had simply done what seemed right. She hadn't left her child, and she hadn't let her colleagues down. Esperanza, Tamara said, taking a seat beside her. Elena Vargas called me. She wants to meet today, says she has an important proposal. What proposal? Esperanza asked, surprised. She didn't say. Tamara shook her head. She asked you to come as soon as Sophia is discharged. The discharge went quickly. Sophia felt like a heroine, telling everyone she met about her operation. Emilio carried her things with great ceremony, playing the attentive big brother. The trip home turned into a little celebration. The children laughed. Tamara told funny stories, and Esperanza caught herself thinking she hadn't felt this happy in a long time. But at home, an unpleasant surprise awaited them. Joaquin was standing on the doorstep, with a bouquet of flowers and a solemn look. He seemed to have come with good intentions, but Esperanza knew him too well to believe the mask. Hi, he said, addressing the children. How are you, kiddos? I heard Sophia was sick. Daddy brought gifts. The children froze, unsure. On the one hand, this was their father. On the other, they remembered the recent fights and their mother's tears all too well. Dad, Emilio said cautiously. You're not going to yell at Mom anymore, are you? Of course I'm not, Joaquin smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Dad understands his mistakes. I want to talk to Mom and apologize. Don't touch the children, Tamara said firmly, stepping in front of Esperanza and the kids. And in general, Joaquin, you have no business here. Who are you to tell me what to do? Joaquin's face changed at once, irritation crept into his voice. They're my children, my ex-wife. None of your business, Tamara shot back. It is my business, she stood her ground. I'm not going to let you traumatize the kids with your visits. Esperanza could feel the air thickening, the tension rising. She took the children by the hand and led them aside. Joaquin, she said calmly, what do you want? To talk. Alone, he said, darting a look at Tamara. Without outsiders. Then not here and not now. The children just got out of the hospital. Yes, I heard about your theatrical performance, Joaquin sneered. A presentation from a hospital room. Nice PR? It wasn't PR. It was just work. Work? Joaquin laughed. You think I don't know what you're doing there? Drawing pictures for peanuts. And the kids? The kids have to suffer, land in the hospital, while you play at being an artist? The kids aren't suffering, Esperanza said firmly. On the contrary, they see that their mother can handle difficulties. Handle? Joaquin's voice grew nastier. You call it handling when your daughter ends up in the hospital while you're working? A good mother would have been there. I was there. Esperanza snapped. I've always been there. I didn't leave her side for a minute. Of course, Joaquin said snidely. The heroic mother. Then why did the court give you a probationary period? Because they doubt your abilities. The words hit home. Esperanza really did live under the Damoclean sword of that probation for more months until the case would be reviewed again. You know what? Joaquin went on, seeing he'd struck a nerve. I'm magnanimous. I'm ready to withdraw the lawsuit. I'll even drop my demand to get the child support back. One condition, the kids stay with me. And you can do your design to your heart's content. No, Esperanza said softly but firmly. Think it over. I have a 3-room apartment, a steady job, resources. And you? A 1-room rental and pie-in-the-sky prospects. I have love for my children, Esperanza replied calmly. That's worth more than any apartment. Love? Joaquin snorted. Love won't get you far. The kids will grow up and realize who really helped them in life and who made them live in poverty. Leave, Esperanza said, feeling anger boil up in her chest. Go, before I call the police. The police? Joaquin laughed. For what? Wanting to see my own children. Are you out of your mind? For threatening and frightening the children, Tamara interjected. For disturbing the peace of the building. Joaquin lingered a moment longer, glancing from Esperanza to the children, who were hiding behind their mother. Then he tossed the bouquet to the ground and spun around sharply. This isn't over, he growled. We'll talk again, he added quietly. When Joaquin left, Esperanza felt her knees go weak. She sank onto the steps of the entryway, and the children crowded around her. Mom, is Dad not coming back anymore? Sophia asked. I don't know, sweetheart, Esperanza tried to smile. But if he does, we won't be afraid. Can he really take us away? Emilio added, anxiety in his voice. Esperanza looked into her son's serious eyes and knew she couldn't lie. The children needed the truth, so they could be ready. He might try, she answered honestly. But we'll fight. All of us, together. And will Uncle Andres help us? Sophia asked suddenly. Uncle Andres? Esperanza was surprised. How do you know him? He came to the hospital and brought me toys. And he talked to you. He's nice, the girl said with certainty. Esperanza felt a warm, aching fullness in her chest. Andres really had supported her in the hard moments, without imposing, but making it clear she wasn't alone. That evening, Esperanza was supposed to meet with Elena. She left the children with Tamara, who gladly agreed to stay with them. The road to the office felt short. Her head was full of thoughts about her confrontation with Joaquin and the upcoming meeting with Elena. Elena greeted her with a glass of champagne and a wide smile. Congratulations, she said, handing her the glass. You caused a sensation. The clients are thrilled, and your hospital presentation has already become a legend in our field. Thank you, Esperanza replied shyly. I just did my job. Exactly. And you did it professionally, despite everything. That's why I have a proposal for you. Elena walked to the window, turned around, and said, I want to offer you a partnership. Not as an employee, as an equal partner. 50-50. The studio will be called Harmony IK. What do you say? Esperanza almost dropped her glass. A partnership? After 2 months of work? That's too good to be true. But why? She asked, stumbling over her words. I hardly have any experience. But you have talent, intuition, and most importantly, humanity. You don't just create beautiful interiors, you create homes people want to live in. That's priceless. And what happens to my share if I fail? You won't, Elena said confidently. You have the right motivation. You're doing this not for money, but for your children. And that's the strongest motivation there is. At home, Esperanza told the children about Elena's offer. Emilio listened seriously and nodded. That's good, Mom. So now we'll have our own company? Looks like it, Esperanza smiled. And will Uncle Andres be your client? Sophia asked. Maybe. Why? I like him. He's kind, and he doesn't yell. Esperanza smiled even wider. Children really do sense people better than adults. If Sophia liked Andres, then he truly was a good person. A week later, they moved into a new 2-bedroom apartment, bright, with large windows and a view of the park. The children were delighted with their own rooms, and for the first time Esperanza felt that they finally had a real home. Joaquin didn't stop trying to exert pressure. He called, demanded meetings with the children, threatened new lawsuits, spread rumors among mutual acquaintances. But Esperanza no longer feared his threats. She had gained confidence, the support of friends, and, most importantly, proof of her own strength and independence. Her mother's attitude gradually began to change. Valentina started visiting, saw how well her grandchildren were doing, and slowly began to feel proud of her daughter. You know, Esperanza, she said one day, helping the kids put together a puzzle, maybe you were right after all. The children are happy, you're confident, and Joaquin, well, maybe he really wasn't such a good husband. Mom, Esperanza said gently, you just wanted what was best for me. I understand. I did, Valentina sighed. I just didn't realize that the best is when a person lives honestly, not out of convenience. Her relationship with Andres developed slowly and carefully. He didn't rush things, understanding that people need time to believe in the possibility of new love. They met as friends, went to the park with the children, talked about work and life. Gradually, Esperanza realized that around him, she felt calm and safe. You have a beautiful family, he said one day as they sat on a park bench, watching the children play. Love, care, support, I think that's where real family is. 6 months later, the court issued the final ruling on the children's residence. Esperanza presented income statements, documents for the new apartment, and a letter of recommendation from work. Joaquin once again brought his lawyer and repeated his threats, but his arguments sounded weak compared to his ex-wife's obvious progress. Taking into account the respondent's stable financial situation and the children's psychological well-being, the court, the same judge as before, ruled that the children would permanently reside with their mother. As she walked out of the courthouse, Esperanza felt a heavy weight lift from her shoulders. She was free. Her children were safe. The future no longer frightened her with its uncertainty. Andres was waiting at the courthouse entrance with a bouquet of flowers and a smile. Well, how did it go? He asked. We won, Esperanza said happily. Completely and finally. Then I have a suggestion, Andres said, handing her the bouquet. How about celebrating your victory with dinner at a restaurant? Just the two of us. Esperanza looked at him and realized she was ready for a new chapter in her life. Ready to be not only a mother and a professional, but also simply a woman who had the right to be happy. With pleasure, she said. That evening, after tucking the children into bed in their new rooms, Esperanza walked to the mirror in the hallway, the same cracked mirror she hadn't thrown away during the move. The crack was still there, but now it didn't seem like a flaw, rather a feature. Like a scar that reminds you of what you've survived and overcome. Esperanza smiled at her reflection. She no longer clenched her teeth in helplessness, only in determination to be happy. And she knew she would succeed. Because she had endured the hardest trials without breaking. Because she had learned to fight for her dreams and stay true to herself. Because she had finally understood the most important truth, happiness can't be given, it can only be earned. And she had earned hers.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.